We are here today, Mary Lee Niadine and Lauda Leon, and we're going to be discussing various aspects of the virus, consciousness AI, which is different and much more sophisticated than the traditional aspect of what people are being told about with regards to artificial intelligence. This is an aspect of the virus that we're going to be looking into because it has many parts. So welcome, Mary Lee. It's been a while since we've, done this.
Yeah, and there's been a lot happening in between there too, So as of this part of it, I have just recently put out a new article out there on my website that does talk more about my involvement over many incarnations with what we are seeing around us right now. And even though it does sound like a huge part of it, comparatively, my role was very small, but it was part of why I had to return, or I felt I had to return over and over to try to correct this error that I was involved in a very long time ago. I don't get too much into some of the newer ideas of, karmic lessons, that kind of stuff. I, just to kind of put it in a little nutshell, way back during the time that most people relate to what was Mu and Lemuria. Mm-hmm. And this is just one little piece of all of this. So, but I'm going to try to contain it down to that time period. I was, during that part of my narrative that I entered in it at that time, I was severely betrayed and duped into helping write a virus that was aligned with the crystalline structure of, then it was more of the original planet Earth, and it wasn't quite as over into the simulation, but it was a key component of the virus that was planted in there that kind of started up the simulation that we are talking about.
So was it the counterfeit Crystalline program that overlaid the original?
It was part of that. Mm-hmm. I was misled that it was going to be beneficial, and I own the mistakes of making those decisions. It's not that I'm trying to wiggle out of it. Mm-hmm. All of the stuff that I have gone through lifetime after lifetime to try to correct this error, I'm not looking for, forgiveness, any of that kind of stuff. That was just one of the guidelines of why I came in the way I did the many times, was to try to correct that once I found out that I had been totally betrayed. This has to do a lot with my behemoth dislike for the seraph. Mm-hmm. And the angelic realms, and it goes way deep into a lot of that stuff. We probably don't have enough time to get into too much of that detail, but if anybody reads some of my articles, they'll get a taste of where some of that comes from. I've held back on saying a lot about this because I wanted to make sure this coming in this time after many others, I came in without the mind swipe that some people are talking about. I came in with full memory. Mm-hmm. When I came in, I had strategically did a fractalization within my own memory banks, so that if I was unable to navigate through the obstacles of trying to get this plan in motion, that information would not be compromised at that time. I refer to that as the, a couple of things, the core wisdom repositories. Mm-hmm. To visually look at this, it's like a repository with many doors. Mm-hmm. There were 16 doors, and as one was navigated, then another one had to go, it's kind of a level system, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. So when I dropped that in back then it started a chain reaction within that crystalline structure, and it affected the total crystal structure of Earth, the original Earth at that time. So it was kind of a mad dash all the way through there in different incarnations, as you know, trying to keep track of the knowledge, because my particular virus was aligned with the information part. That's why I talk a lot about word magic and that kind of thing, because it all falls into how that part of it, the language and the interpretation and the translations from spirit to material happened. So speed that back up to last winter, about the same time that we started doing our recordings, when I was near Mount Shasta. Okay, well, kind of go ahead and speed forward to that point. That was where I had become aware that what I had found me in the form of a huge crystal. It was a Lemurian Atlantean record keeper. Now, if people are familiar with record keepers, on this particular crystal, you could see on the sides it looked like barcodes. It had little pyramids and different markings all over it when I got it. It also had what is referred to in the crystal world as a phantom flame, rainbow flame. You would turn it and it, you know, had a flame inside of it. And another thing that was very odd about this, the few months that I had it, it started growing another crystal out of it.
Wow.
Yeah, it had grown a crystal. Well, to me it was significant. It was probably about a quarter of an inch outside of it. You could actually see it coming out of it.
Do you have pictures of this?
I no longer have it, because that was part of I found out that was actually, I had made an antivirus and planted it in there. So that's how it came around. There is a picture on my website, because I did write about this fire and water purification ceremony that included that crystal at Pluto's Cave, just not too far from Mount Shasta, on the full moon just prior to the solar eclipse in August. So I don't know how much detail that kind of gives us a little bit of a time span to pick apart there. Well,
let's take this into parts.
Okay, yeah.
Because, you know, the parts where you're discussing how you created one aspect of this original counterfeit overlay virus, that in essence would work in tandem with the rest of it, because that's how it's designed. It's designed to attach itself to the other parts, and in that way be woven entirely into a net system. So if we take it into parts and we maybe describe a little bit in deeper detail about who it was that duped you originally, and go into the story of the Sephiroth, Sephiroth, but yeah.
I just shorten it and say the seraph. You know, that kind of gives you the umbrella of the higher. When you look at the hierarchies of the angelics, they have claimed to be the highest of the highest.
Yeah, they claim.
Yeah. So that's and they have gone by many names, and they have woven their story in the inversion so delicately. This is where I have a lot of problems with a lot of this false light stuff, because with a lot of the frequencies and characters that I have dealt with, and even myself, I say it a lot, I would rather go toe to toe with the deepest, darkest of demons, because I know what I'm dealing with there. That's at least right there in your face, and yes, I have. You know, it's being kissed by the sweetness of the mask of the light. That's the betrayal that I'm talking about. That was so deep seated with me at that point.
So how did you discover it was a mask?
Yeah.
How did you discover that? Because
and I've got the
that you were working with them.
Yes. Yes.
And had been for a long time.
Yes. And I know one time when you and I had first contacted one another in this lifetime, you had said that that was one of the first visuals you got of me as being this being at that time. And that's kind of where our story started moving. And that was, I don't know, what, about 3 years ago or so, maybe?
About 3 years ago,
yeah. So that was right at the beginning of what I call my fire and water purification quest that took me from the Yellowstone caldera to Colorado to California to Oregon, and now back to the Rockies. So that was the last part of my purification of this quest that started from clear back then. Okay. So
and what was the purpose or the job that you and the other seraphs had?
My particular, at that point, was kind of, it'd be best to try to describe it as a combination between priestess and scientist. Back then, there was not such a definition between spiritual and scientific. It was almost non-existent.
Yeah,
it was the same thing. It was the same thing. So I had kind of a dual role there, very scientific and very spiritual with that. So, and I also had an incarnation, not too much different than that still contained the Lemurian part, but then also Atlantean at the same time, and I was not corporeal. Okay, so when we try to translate some of these interactions that we have had in different realms and different perspectives, it's kind of hard to even convey that, because some of what I've experienced is an interaction that didn't even contain a human vessel. So, this one, yes, I did have a vessel. I was not human though at that.
So what was the agenda of the Sephiroth?
This goes completely back to what I just today posted another article out there where I'm talking about the primal wounding. And if you want to take in the Enuma Elish translation of that wounding of Apsu and Tiamat, you can kind of get an idea of where that came from. My part of this quest with the crystal also incorporated, I called her Grandma Gray. And she, if you go on the website, a picture of the house I was staying at during this time is in front of her. She's a huge rock full of crystals and fossils, water fossils and everything else. The native tribes around there called it Turtle Island, Turtle Rock. So what the legends around that area entailed with that is that she was actually a piece of the primordial Pacific Shelf, which was actually a piece of Lemuria. As I got aligned with those energies, and this was in direct alignment with Mount Shasta. I had Mount Shasta, I watched the sun come up behind Mount Shasta every morning, and it went down behind Grandma Gray every night, those months that I was there. A very high frequency energy area, and that led to my heart getting blown out and the electrical conduction problems that happened with my heart at that time, which is another interesting connection, is because as I was working with Grandma Gray, which I have come to know that was part of, in that storyline, the Tiamat, this was actually the heart center portal of when Tiamat was separated and scattered by Marduk and the others. It wasn't just Marduk, there was many of the others involved in that too. But to be landing in this place with uncanny circumstances that took me on this voyage through here, and then to have that crystal come up, the heart portal with the Tiamat, the Pluto's cave underneath, well, it's not right under Mount Shasta, but it's close, and the tunnels do go clear down through there. That was the sequence that happened, and that was last winter when we had started our other interviews, the other podcasts that were going on there. So,
what do you think is the real identity of the Sephiroths?
They are lower level. I hate talking in the terms of hierarchies. This is hard to try to put this, but they are part of the ones that plotted against the downfall of in that story of Tiamat and Apsu. We're talking Ea, we're talking Anu,
and Lil.
Yeah. Well, and then you have all of that branching out, the Enki, the Inlet. We're talking about the same beings, the same frequencies. These are all the same frequencies. It's just at one point the Seraph found it more beneficial to present themselves in a more light casted form. And opportunistic, very opportunistic along those lines. This is also, we also talked a lot about the Demiurge, Wetiko, that kind of stuff before in our other ones, and this is the same thing. Okay, they have taken different names all the way through. The Abrahamic triad was really when Solomon and Abraham and all of that was going on, that came from this same area also. You know, and it was the takeover of the primal sacred masculine and feminine at that time. That was the schism, and that's what I talk about being the primal wounding, the core wounding that we even to this day as individuals keep repeating in our narrative.
Okay, so they got trapped within their own consciousness constructs, and they got trapped within their how shall we say, their square reality.
These viruses that were being developed at that time in this grand architectural scheme, actually they were overcome by the viruses themselves. Okay, that is the Wetiko virus that we were speaking of. And
then the technology that they utilize, which when I speak about the square trap systems, it's they trapped the 90-degree reality systems into interlocked 90-degree systems, so that it ended up being like squares and geometric shapes of locking in the virus within that consciousness construct and not being able to get out, because it ends up being an infinity system.
Yes, yes. Now some of that is part of the natural format of the original
design.
Yes. And what these viruses did was take those original and replicated and
And each
started
replication,
yeah,
created, and this is actually what happened to every body within that system. So the moment that it's a self-replicating gnosis virus, essentially, because it's all based on consciousness, and consciousness creates and manifests reality. And so what better technology than to have a self-replicating mirror system, geometric network of infinite realities merged together.
Yeah. And this virus that I was involved in, well, the series of viruses that happened at that point, that is what culminated, and it became very clear. Well, it became clear way before this, but it was undeniably clear with what happened with Atlantis. Okay. So by that point, I had already known the damage that I was involved in, and had started my quest of trying to undo what I was involved in, and I felt very, very, right up until the point that I left Wyoming when we first met, I felt very responsible for millions and millions of souls at that time. And I carried that for a very, very long time.
So they wanted you to, I mean, what was the purpose of them wanting to get you to create that aspect of the virus?
This was directly related with what people are calling now the soul traps.
Right.
So
yeah,
it was directed. It starts with information, and that's, some people that are following some of my work will hear me talk about the info porn and what is going on around us now with information. The difference between information, knowledge, wisdom, gnosis, noose, weird, all of that.
So did they know that they were themselves trapped, and this was the only way that they could procure from that point any kind of essence to the original? Is this the only methodology that they could come up with?
What I ran into then, and I still run into it now, is the linear thought. That's where they actually locked themselves in, because they were not able to think outside of their cubes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, think outside the box, I guess, is it's kind of odd that that's a common term now, that they just got locked into that, and this virus just replicated and caused a total separation from the original template.
Right.
And that drive to take over that template. And
okay, so I have memory of that's what they call the fall, of memory of the war that ensued when the inception or corruption of thought entered.
Yes.
That's when the virus could enter. So the moment that their thoughts could be corrupted by their own idea, because prior to that, the state of consciousness that they held, it wasn't synonymous with corruption. So with the advent of corruption in their thought, that's when the virus could enter.
Yeah. See, it was a total, the way that I saw it then, and that I'm glad you brought up the term the fall, because that has been so misused. The way that you present it, I am very much in alignment with, but a lot of what has happened to it, it makes it sound like it was an accident. It was not an accident. No. It was premeditated. It was a takedown. So, and I actually put that in the article today, so it's in there too, about that. What had happened, what I had seen at that point and have watched, is the whole idea of the inversion of light and dark, and adding evil into the mix of, making chaos sound bad, the void sound bad, dark sound bad. All of that started really getting woven in there completely. Now, the primal part that I talk about is that the creative aspect of the void and chaos that has to be worked in there, and it's very sacred. That is what they coveted and wanted to control. And that's why, according to that story of Tiamat and Apsu that they talk about, which is, of course, written by the winners, by the perpetrators. Okay, so we also have to look at that, at the perspective there. So they carefully wove in there that chaos was evil and they needed to conquer it. And then you see the idea of even earth, and a lot of the religions that go out there, that you have to conquer the wildness of Mother Nature. The people that align with that frequency, that vibration, the indigenous peoples being wiped out. So that's where that virus kind of took off into those areas. So that is where I take it back to that primal wounding. That's where that greed and unsatiable control got interjected in there. And the more they played with these viruses, the more it started replicating within them. And here we are. So that's
because it's a psychic virus. And psychic viruses are manifesting viruses. This is what people don't get. It is a psychic virus, but knowing that we as creators create out of consciousness, then this virus is consciousness creating the counterfeit. So now when you were working with this vibration or this energy, this ancient frequency, in your recollection, what were they originally?
Are you speaking of the Seraph or that group?
That group.
When you're thinking in the terms of frequency, it's hard to categorize them into. They are of the light. Okay, if you're trying to separate that point from 0 point of the void into the singularity, they were part of that singularity. But when the singularity went into the duality, that kind of caused this misconceived idea of light versus dark. Okay.
Well,
now
maybe we have to describe what the singularity is in terms of coming from the deep.
Okay.
And where everything has manifested from the deep, and how even light within its creation from the deep is the same. I'm not sure if singularity is the right term really for it.
It's like a 0 point. There is when you're thinking in the terms of numbers or any of that, it is a point that cannot be conceived in there, because the void, or what you call the deep, that primordial nothingness but everything, had not been separated into actually the conscious idea of light and dark, hot and cold, so that 0 point in alchemical terms is that interface from non-existent to existent, from
But
Non-material to
non-existent
material.
to existent. Okay, so here's where, and I know this causes a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
From non-existence to existence doesn't necessarily mean duality.
Mm-mm.
And so this is where the virus came in.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're everything, there's no duality
Mm-hmm.
needed. So when the thought of a consciousness going into its darker self, or maybe imprinting with the ego, but the ego being the virus, and that being then put into a part of what a being was, that also was, I think, very instrumental in how even this virus existed and could exist.
Yeah. The ego part, in my understanding, came much later. Okay. The ego seeds were there. Yes, the seed of the ego, but before it actually, until it took the trauma
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to cause the ego to, it was a defense mechanism
Mm-hmm.
in response to that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which we all know even to this day, in psychology, defense mechanisms can be good to a certain point, but then they can turn on you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what the ego did, and does. You know, it has its function. It's a tool, just like the rest of the things that are in here. But when we go clear back to that moment, that spark of, I get the best word I can think of is, like you said, the conscious spark.
Mm-hmm.
When the void became conscious,
Yeah.
is to me is what that 0 point is.
Yeah. Well, that's where all creation comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this particular realm in particular, who, you know, they focus on light. Everything here has been dichotomized into light versus dark, so that the entrainment is to reject anything that has to do with darkness and reject anything that has to do with the demonization of the parts of consciousness that are the anti-creation aspect. But the anti-creation aspect isn't the void, and it's not the deep.
Yeah.
Two different things.
It's like that. Even in duality, I don't even look at the two as two. There's actually three. You have the fulcrum that's in there. So even with the one, you actually have the two.
Yeah.
There's no definition between that. So when that consciousness happened and it became aware, and then light came from dark, then kind of this interplay started, okay, in that. And you're absolutely right, the void and the deep is not dark itself. It's not light. It's before that moment of that question.
And the moment, the very moment that a thought sparked out of the deep, that was, consciousness is electricity. And so it's electromagnetic, because everything in the universe is drawn to you. So the very second creation was created, it was the spark, which is like the electricity, literally electrical light out of the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we talk about when we try to use the term frequency and energy as opposed to the material form.
Yeah. So you get these frequencies who stay stuck in what they are, or quote, the package that they've accepted that they are, because that isn't necessarily really what they are.
Yeah.
Even when discussing, you know, these groups like the Sephiroths and all of the different principalities that are in there in all of these hierarchies, when you get trapped in a system, you're getting trapped in the system of your own mind as to what you are, and you're going to stay there. So that is where evolution stops. And at some point, in some juncture, they stayed there. Is that not correct? They stayed in that identity.
There was a stunting of growth at that point, yes. And I still have not been able to conceptualize or interpret, translate out the exact moment of that interference. It may have been part of the act itself of the spark from the void. From the very beginning. I don't know if that was something that actually interjected later, because it all had to come from one place, even, you know.
My memory is that it came later.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, I think it may have manifested later, you know.
Yeah, it manifested later, but the moment that the spark happened from the deep, the creation itself wanted to experience itself. So it was just like a child, in the sense that it was just creating and happy to create and experience its creation. And it was not infected at that point.
Yeah.
So it was just a pure essence.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and see, that is where my memory banks take me. That's it. But I can't, I have been unable to actually pinpoint where the actual interjection was, because those seeds could have been laying dormant for, you know. And then, you know, when I start getting into some of those areas, that to me, even to this day, I don't even go into the other aspect of trying to figure out all of the building blocks, you know, the sacred geometry and all that stuff. I understand it, that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot of people go down blind alleys. It takes people into areas that are just not very productive or practical, you know. But I do understand that, but I don't even go, it's inconsequential to what my role is right now. That doesn't mean it's good or bad or anything. I'm not saying that.
So what did you think that you were going to be doing when you agreed to do this aspect of the virus? Like, what was it in your mind that you actually thought that you were going to be doing? Did you think you were really going to be how would this be helping?
Well, we weren't even, I guess the team I was on at this time, we were presented with what we were told as, it's the typical thing. We were told there was a problem and we needed a solution. It goes right to that.
And what were you told was the problem?
The problem was, at that point, you know, and that's where the whole thing is that the dark needed to be overcome. That
okay. All right.
That it was that primal dichotomy that happens there, that the light needed to control the dark.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And it didn't take very long for me to figure out that wasn't exactly the way that it was presented, but the damage had already been done. It had already been released. And then the only thing I could do from that point in my journey, my part of it, was to try to undo what I could have undone with that, which is what happened. So.
And how did you try and counter this part of the infection that you're responsible for lifetime after lifetime? Can you give us some examples of what that looked like?
Well, most of it was chasing it down, trying to see where it was going, trying to find its pattern, because I quickly found out that it wasn't just the virus I was working with. Once it joined with the others, then it became a whole different equation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The algorithms totally switched, and it replicated and went on tangents so rapidly that about all I could do many, many times was just observe and try to gauge where it was going, what kind of a pattern may have been in there. And in the meantime, I had to kind of watch what I could do to try to counteract that pattern. So way down the line.
So,
okay, a lot of these incarnations were in the form of like being monk.
right.
Okay. I did a lot of scribing, and that's why I have such an art with word crafting, is because many of those incarnations I spent deep in that. And a few times I tried to interject and stop it, and that's where I ended up decapitated, burned at the stake, that kind of stuff, you know, because every time I tried to interject, you know, then
you'd get stopped.
I was taken out. Yeah, my vessel was taken out. But so that was and then I had to learn how to stop that pattern, because that was starting to replicate. I was getting caught up in that reincarnation thing. Even though I was conscious of what was going on, I started getting less and less capable of commanding my own entrance, my own narrative.
Right.
It was starting to infect me. So I spent a few lifetimes trying to counteract that. I figured out that I had to deal with my issues first and clear that out and maintain that each time I came in. And clear out more. And that's that burning purification thing that I'm talking about, you know.
So you were infected, and you know, just so people, they can comprehend how infection works, because infection works in such a way that you replicate your own programs, and you cause them through the mirror systems here in whatever lifetime you happen to be in, so that you're causing the same stagnation and the same destructive patternings.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, which make it really difficult for, you know, to get out of, because you're replicating it yourself with the mirror systems.
Yeah, and the other part of that too is when you take the micro to the macro, as your individual is dealing with this, that is also reflecting in the macro realms.
Well, exactly, because as above, so below.
Yeah.
Because the mirror systems, the universe, your universe can't help but mirror back to you what you're doing. So if you're replicating your own virus, aka your own destructive patterns, then your universe is going to have to give that back to you. It's going to have to reflect it back to you. There's no other option, because we are manifesting creation of our own realities. The virus is the real, of course, and this is also a part of the virus, which has created infinity system realities based on reals, REEL. But it works in tandem with our own consciousness and what we are co-creating together, what we're deciding as a population. And that's why news media and media in general is so powerful, and they know it's a powerful spell being woven over people's consciousness. And this is the reason why they promote people having televisions, and they promote people having cable, and promote people watching news, so that they can get programmed in the virus of the machine that creates the reality. You know, this is how it works. So they know it.
Yep. And see, that takes us way into many other levels of interesting stuff to look at, and what is happening around us. So
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know if we probably don't want to open up too much of that now. We're probably getting pretty close to the end of this first one, right?
Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit more about, because this is going to be the end of this part, and we'll go into those deeper aspects in the next part. But let's just end this part with describing how the virus was created to begin with.
How the virus was, boy, now this is kind of hard to do because, like I said, that it was frequency that I was dealing with, so there's not terms.
But you recall, because I was there back then.
Yes, I know you were.
Okay, so you recall we were programming crystals.
Mm-hmm.
And the frequencies that we would lock into the crystals, we had created what living consciousness in the crystals.
Yes. And see, that is a very good point. Thank you, Lauda, for bringing that up, is the sentience of the crystals themselves. Okay, so many people are caught up in this idea that it's only mammals that have sentience.
No.
It's only, you know, and that's a whole other subject we can go into some other time.
They're alive.
The crystalline structure
Is alive.
is an actual consciousness itself, and that was part of what I had such a hard time dealing with, is because I didn't. It was like a scientist with a lab rat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I had to separate my empathic self away from the crystals that I was working with.
Well, because you were imprisoning the crystal consciousness.
Yeah. And altering, just like people think about, cloning and DNA fracturing, and there's that kind of stuff going on. Taking the basic structures of these beings.
Yes.
And tampering with them. Yes.
And replicating them and putting them via force, ripping their essence apart and utilizing it. Yeah.
Yep. And see, that was part of the main drive, not necessarily my mistake for me. What I have done through all of this time is to try to reconcile what I did to them. Not necessarily, it's bad enough that I feel bad about myself, but that's what I feel the worst about.
Now, is it not true that when this happened, when you were being recruited, you were removed from Lemuria and placed into Atlantis?
Yes.
I know, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I had stayed in Lemuria, and I was involved in trying to get you and the group of scientists to stop.
Yeah. I remember that. I really do. And that's when we first met this time around, it was like, not a collide. Yeah, it was kind of a carousel fracture. I could just see all of those because we have run into this many times.
Yeah. But
going back to that primary thing, yes. And I was so duped. I thought for sure I was helping at that time. And
well, you were a renowned, you could say, for lack of a better way of putting it, you were a renowned scientist.
Yeah, but that still doesn't explain it away. That
no. But I'm saying, but this was the thing. You were more mind. See, and that's why they knew that. And this is what is profoundly interesting of how this all works, because the more mind aspect of it is what you've had to deal with lifetime after lifetime to undo that part, to get you back into, quote, the heart.
Well, see, that was part of me that was interjected into that crystal.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So that's what I've done all through this, and that's what I am incorporating now into my final role. Yeah. Is stepping into that, reclaiming the part of me that I put in. Yeah. And
this, And this, well, and I know that, you know, when I say this, this is going to hit home too, is that when people to this day utilize crystals, living rocks, um, they are sentient beings,
Yes.
and they have their own sentient essence and consciousness and personality even. So I personally advise not using them per se,
Mm-hmm.
but requesting assistance and leaving it up to them whether they feel energetically that they can and will, because the frequency is in sync, because they already know, and they know what to do for
Yeah.
us. It's it their ability to be able to aid us is already in their being.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we communicate with them, we're actually really slow to the take because they're already on it.
Mm-hmm.
The second that we are within the vicinity of them, they're already doing work on us.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't even they don't have the intellect to slow them down.
No. So, but
Yeah.
by the same token, you know, I also know that when you override their will and you program them to do your own will and what you may think is right, or because
Mm-hmm.
you did this. And let's face it, we were trained in Lemuria and Mu. In the first Mu, we were trained to use crystals, and this is where a lot of the technology came from. The natural electromagnetic frequency of all of the bodies
Mm-hmm.
through the crystal. So it wasn't even necessarily quite benevolent even in Mu, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Although everybody wants to think that Mu was like all good. It wasn't necessary. I mean, we were learning the same kind of technology, and we were learning to use the same thing, and priestesses were in charge of this technology back then. And Mary Lee and I were both priestesses back then,
Yeah.
in charge of a lot of that. So yeah, once again, right, our concept of what's good and bad is in distortion, because both were taking advantage for their own reasons and their own agendas and their own ulterior light motives.
Yes.
Neither were in the right.
Yeah.
Was Did one really screw up? Yes.
Yeah.
You know, at least Mu knew better to know how, you know, not to go so far.
Mm-hmm.
But we did try and warn you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, once I got in there, I did one of those. I thought I was smart enough to do a double, I guess your double spy kind of thing, where I could use my Atlantean, because that's where I was held in stasis as the non-corporeal that I was telling you about, was during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And my ego at that time was telling me that I was powerful enough to be able to go in there and fix it.
Yeah.
And all that did was
Just
cause a huge chain reaction. And you know, now I'm still kicking myself in the butt. But
well, there's also a reason why the technology used water, and our societies were built in such a way that water was running right through the entire the building structure of both Atlantis and Mu.
yes.
And it's because the technology in frequency would was increased hugely with the water,
Mm-hmm.
and it was able to travel huge distances, so that the power structures were, I mean, if you think of the technology, it was incredible, the distances that could go.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that needs to be rediscovered, because we have the dirty version of technology in this day and age now, which is actually really antiquated. It's not only antiquated, it's antiquated and dirty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to go back to, some people that have gone into, some of these new age stores with me and everything, that it tears at my heart to go in there and see all of those crystals and everything sitting there. That's raping
Yes.
those crystals right out of there. And I just go in and it overwhelms me.
Yeah.
Completely, totally.
Well,
I do have a few crystals I work with here, but they found me.
Exactly. I was going to say,
yeah.
Did they find you? Did they let you know? Do you communicate and get in? Because they'll always let you know, hey,
yeah,
I'm for you.
Yeah.
I'm here for you. But this situation where all of these crystals, all of these gems, the body of Tara herself is being exploited and raped continually. So again, right, it's an imbalance in frequency. So if you start something off with the imbalance of frequency, how much are they going to be able to do what they're designed to do by nature?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're meant to be where they are. Sometimes they're meant to stay where they are because they're doing a job. Yeah. But yeah, many do find their way to you for a purpose. And I don't want to be hard on people who, I mean, we all love crystals. I know I have a lot of stones, not just crystals. But I've always had this thing since, well, from the beginning, where I communicate with them because they talk, they speak, they have a voice. And we remember this from the time where they really did emanate that living essence in speech. Now, with the advent of this virus, it has corrupted their ability to be communicative, I guess you could say. So all natural platforms have been minimized, and the receptivity of people is minimized also in being able to receive those frequencies in turn.
Yeah.
So replaced by the counterfeit AI consciousness frequency that has also corrupted everything.
Yeah. And that would certainly be a good place to start with our next one, is to talk more about that. Not the AI, not the artificial intelligence, but the consciousness, the new mutation levels that we have been watching come through. So.
And with that, we're going to wrap this part up. And we want to thank everybody. Mary Lee, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Old sister.